Good evening. My name is Jo Brett. I'm CEO and occupational therapist at Starjumps Children's Centre, and I'm here with Lou Whitehorn, occupational therapist and neurofeedback practitioner. And we're going to talk a little bit about what neurofeedback is and how it can help children and young people. Lou, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi there, everybody. I'm Lou Whitehorn, and I'm the neurofeedback therapist at Starjumps. And today I'm hopefully going to enlighten you a little bit about what neurofeedback is and explain what some of the issues that it can really help children with. I've been doing neurofeedback at Starjumps for about the last 9 years. It seems like shorter. And I found it's a really lovely treatment that goes very hand in hand with some of the other treatments that we have here and can really help children. So we've had some really lovely results with it.
Okay, Lou. So what sort of issues can neurofeedback help with?
So neurofeedback's a lovely, very calming treatment that's particularly good for certain things. It can really help with issues of emotional regulation. It can help with children with high anxiety. It can really help with sleep and getting children more into better sleep patterns and perhaps help maintain sleep. And it's particularly good for attention deficit disorders. In Starjumps, we see quite a lot of children who have sensory processing disorders, and it can be very good for that because it's a very calming treatment, particularly with things like sensory sensitivity that goes very hand in hand with high anxiety and high arousal levels. So it can really help with that. And I often find children who have even a dyspraxic type profile, sometimes it can really help with things like their spatial awareness. I see sometimes children who have quite low mood, and I find during the treatment often their mood will start to really improve and come up. So there are many things that we can help with, but once the treatments have started, it's a really lovely treatment. Children really enjoy coming for this treatment. It's very relaxing. It's not at all stressy. They really just have to look at the screen, often watching things that they really want to see. And I think they find it very enjoyable. Therefore, often after they start having their treatment and it starts helping them with things, and maybe if it's, for example, something like very high anxiety and they're finding it very difficult to do things, often once they've started the changing and we're getting the more desired behaviours and they're managing to do more and achieve more, it really has a lovely knock-on effect to their self-esteem as well. So often that can really help with that area too.
Are there any children with particular diagnoses that neurofeedback helps with?
Well, I see a lot of children who have autistic spectrum disorder. I see a lot of children who have ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or just attention deficit disorder. I see a lot of children who perhaps have coordination disorders or very dyspraxic type profiles. And sometimes just children who have general global developmental delay. And often children will come and see me and they already have a diagnosis, but sometimes they may be waiting on a waiting list, waiting to have a diagnostic assessment, and they're just really struggling with certain things. And that's fine. They can still come at that point. And sometimes I see children that really don't have a diagnosis. They're just struggling and having a lot of issues. So you don't have to have a diagnosis to have this treatment. And often I find that once they've started the treatment, it's going to help with all sorts of the things, as in, it might really help them to do their homework. If they've got high anxiety, perhaps they're finding it difficult to get to school, or it might be a very academic year, for example, and they're really struggling with exams and they've got high anxiety over exams. It could be that possibly it's just things like really struggling with their attention and focus at school. There are many things that it can help with. It can help with them staying on task. It can help with them following instructions. It could be tuning in. It could be processing information. There are many symptoms that it can help with, because really what we're doing is we're treating the symptoms. So, whatever your issues are, the child, we can just look at those, and then we're going to be tracking what they are and seeing if we can get some differences once the treatment started. Back to you, Jo.
Lovely. Okay, so Lou, can you briefly, because I know it is quite complicated, but in simple terms, explain how neurofeedback works and show us some of the equipment? I'm going to leave you to have full screen so you can show it more easily, and I'll jump back in a moment.
Right, okay. So I really like to think of neurofeedback as brainwave training to try and achieve optimal brain function in the brain. And so really what we're doing is we're helping the brain to self-regulate. And in star jumps, like many of our treatments here, it goes on the theory of what's called neuroplasticity in the brain. So that's the ability for the brain to change. And in star jumps, we use the type of system that we use is called infralow. And infralow really works on the slow cortical potentials of the brain. This is the part of the brain that really is helping to regulate the excitation thresholds in the brain. And that's the part of the brain that really has an effect on our arousal levels. And we often find with children with certain conditions, this area is quite impaired. Therefore, it's very difficult for them to self-regulate. With this system, really, the brain is interacting with its own slow cortical potentials. Now, to explain that a bit further, I think probably it's the easiest way to explain to you is try and show you some of this equipment and explain what we do and how we do it and how that works. So the first thing we have to do is we have to get these little electrodes on the child's head. And I'm very skilled at getting them on. I've been doing it for a long time. It doesn't hurt the child. They have to have a little bit of this conduction paste to keep them on the head. And once they're on, the child doesn't really notice that they're on. So once these are on, these have been put on to take what's called an EEG reading of the brain. That's taking a reading of the electrical activity on the brain, which is then fed into my system, monitored, and then it's fed back to the child in real time through a sensory loop. So that's going to be on through this big screen that they're looking at with an auditory system. And then we have little Humphrey here, the teddy, and Humphrey sits on their knee and he's going to be buzzing. He gives some tactile feedback every so often when we've got the brain doing bits of things that we want it to do. And so once we've got the child with the electrodes on and we start the system, the first thing the therapist that I have to do is find what we call a target frequency to work at. And so I'll be spending the first couple of sessions really finding the best optimal target frequency. The other thing I have to do is work out what the protocol for each child is. And that's how long I place the electrodes where on the head and for how long. And that really is a very individual thing depending on what their issues are, as is the target. The frequency is really a very individual thing. It's just each person is different as to what frequency is best to work at. So once we've established all of that, the child just really, what we want them in is in this little chair. And we're going to have them sitting back in a nice, calm, relaxed state, watching the screen. They just have to focus on the screen. So really, what we then do is we inhibit and we reward the brain through the screen. And so what happens is the screen is constantly changing. The auditory system will be changing a little bit. Teddy will be buzzing on and off. And I just say to the child, you just relax and watch whatever you want. You know, on that screen, it's going to be it could even be something that they love watching, like their favorite thing. It doesn't really matter, particularly this is the weirdest bit, what they're watching, because my system is superimposed onto whatever they're watching. And it's going to be constantly changing all the time, asking the brain to do different things, as in rewarding it and maybe inhibiting it sometime, and it's doing the bits we don't want it to do. The child really just has to sit back and relax and watch, and the brain basically, amazingly, does all the work. And amazingly, once we start rewarding the brain, often it will start to adapt, and then it will start to regulate itself. And the outcome of that is that once it's learned that skill, it will start to use it more and more often. And the knock-on effect to that is in the child's behaviour. Because once the brain's calmer and working in a more optimal way, we will start to see some nice differences in their behaviour. And this is the interesting thing is that once we've started this treatment, often within even 2 or 3 sessions, we start to see some really nice differences with the children. The parents will maybe start to notice some really lovely differences. Like they may, for example, Johnny might not have a tantrum before they go to school that day. He's much calmer. Or if he does get a bit upset, he calms down a lot more quickly. And think, oh, that's interesting. Gosh, he wouldn't have been able to do that before. Or maybe stays on reading for a lot longer than he's been able to focus for before. And so really, once we start to get these changes and differences, I say to the parents at that point, now this is where you can really come in, because you can reinforce that behaviour with lots of nice positive reinforcement. You can even talk to the child about what they've achieved and say, wow, you managed to do that. If it was something that they couldn't do, if they were highly anxious, well done, you really managed to do that really well. And the more reinforcement they're getting like that, then the more the behavior will even carry on even more. And so, and then from my point of view, if I'm seeing these differences, I know I'm on the right track with treatment. So we then just carry on with the treatment. Over to you, Jo.
Okay. Thank you, Lou. That's really helpful. When you mentioned the teddy buzzing, that is the teddy vibrates. I just thought maybe not everyone might not know what you mean by buzzing, but that tactile sensation is actually really rewarding, absolutely, isn't it?
A little bit on your knee. It's not a hugely, and also we can control if they don't like that feeling. I can tone that little bit down, so it's just buzzing a tiny bit. And we don't, sometimes if a child really doesn't like it, we don't have to have teddy, but it does just, gives them a little bit more feedback.
I think one thing you said just now about it's very surprising how much children actually really enjoy the treatment. Even a very dysregulated child who might find it really hard to sit still, once they are there sitting in front of that screen, it's kind of mesmerizing and they do really enjoy it. What sort of ages of child would you say neurofeedback can help?
Well, I can really see anybody from about age 3 up to 18 years old. And I find that really, I think below the age of 3, it's a bit of an ask, because I think for a 2-year-old to sit and look at a screen for a long time and they want to really get up and move around too much. So I think that's a bit too young. But as long as they can sit and focus on the screen, they can have the neurofeedback. And, I've had some really lovely results with 3-year-olds, actually.
Fantastic. And how many sessions does a child need to have?
So the sessions, they need to come to me. Each session really needs to last an hour long. It's worth knowing that they have to be here for a whole hour, because by the time I've talked to mum and dad or their carer and they've sat in the chair, I've managed to get the electrodes on and we've done all the movements and placements or whatever we're doing, we really need a whole hour. And also they really need to come for about a minimum of about 20 sessions for it to have a lasting effect. I really say a minimum, because sometimes we go on longer than 20 sessions. It really depends on what the issues are. Sometimes I see children and we do less sessions, but usually that's because they're possibly returning for a second lot of treatment. Sometimes children will come and have a treatment and then they go off and there's some nice consolidation and they might want, it's been so successful, they might want to revisit it and come back and have more treatment than maybe in the next academic year. And sometimes for one reason or another, they might not do the full course in that situation, but mostly for the initial course, they really should have about 20 or so.
And sometimes you've combined the neurofeedback with occupational therapy and speech and language therapy as well. I don't know if you want to just mention how that can help.
Yes, I mean, I think it's a very useful treatment and goes very well and goes hand in hand with many of the treatments we have here, because really, for things like focus and attention, it means that the children, sometimes when it's having an effect on these areas and they're beginning to come and the child's beginning to have a better ability to do it, it really can help them then to tune in and get them more out of their other sessions.
So they're more regulated, they're sleeping better, attending better, and really in a much more optimal place to take advantage of any other therapies and inputs they might have. And I think you've also found it helpful for exam anxiety and school refusal, those kind of things. It can be really useful for.
Yes, particularly, it's been very good for that. And children, I have had children who have I had a girl last year who was in her GCSE year, and she really actually had got to the stage she had such high anxiety, she couldn't actually attend school at all. And by the time she'd finished her course, and she had very low mood and was very upset and worried about everything. And I think by the time she finished her treatment, she was able to get to school and she managed to do all her GCSEs, I might say. And she's now very happily at a new college. So she was it was a really very successful treatment with her.
One other condition, I'm not sure if you mentioned it earlier, so sorry if I'm repeating, but children with high anxiety who show a profile of pathological demand avoidance. I know you've seen a number of children with that kind of condition that have really benefited.
Yes, that's another condition that I have seen and had quite a lot of, a fair amount of success with. these are the children who it comes under the autistic spectrum disorder umbrella, but pathological demand avoidance, it definitely goes hand in hand with very high anxiety. And the more confrontation and the more demands they're made, the higher the anxiety. So I found that with this treatment, it's such a lovely calming treatment on the brain. You can really calm them down, and you sometimes get less very aggressive or emotionally dysregulated, difficult behaviour at home or even at school, wherever actually. And it's just been, it's like just seems to kind of, it's like pouring oil on and calming a situation. And I think the children feel it as well and just feel that they can be much, much calmer.
Yeah, and helps the whole family as well through that. I was going to just talk about a few of the really lovely things that have been said about the treatments for certain children. So I'm going to talk first of all about a 6-year-old who was waiting for a diagnosis, which ended up being ADHD. And this child was described as having difficulty sitting, concentrating, not speaking, or speaking slowly and quietly. Waiting and sleeping was very difficult. Child could be very impulsive and at times emotional. The parents said, "We had a couple of meltdowns when my child told me she hated her life, school, and hated being them. She told me she couldn't sit still or quietly at school and didn't know what was going on. I spoke to the school, so they were, and started to look for help. I'm delighted to say that although progress was a little slow initially, by the end of the 10 weeks, we'd seen a big difference, as had the school, particularly in ability to sit and concentrate and in a reduction of emotional outbursts. As well as the treatment, Lou was a great resource for things I could try at home with my daughter to help her cope. And I will forever be grateful for her support at what was a very difficult time for us and for her." I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Lou, about that particular example.
Yes, no, that little boy, he did really well. It took a little, sometimes it's, I said sometimes you get these quick results and you can see changes very quickly. In fact, he took a little bit longer, interestingly. I think Mum mentioned that in her letter to us, but she actually noticed that really about halfway through the treatment, there was really quite a significant change suddenly. And then he just continued and this lovely improving and improving, and really was so much calmer in the end and so much more able to attend to his work at school and be less fidgety and really managing to do his homework. I mean, he was really, it was a joy to watch, actually. I think, again, it really, they had a big family and it really helped in the family.
I've got another one from a 4-year-old diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. Where the parent says, "This has improved my child's eye contact, focus and attention, which makes it possible to absorb things from the natural environment, and also has improved compliance and put him on the right path for learning." Which is lovely. Another one for a 3-year-old with autism traits awaiting a diagnostic assessment. Here we've got, after 6 neurofeedback sessions with Lou, our son stopped speaking to himself through non-intelligible words that were not in context, and delayed echolalia. This enabled him to be more aware and receptive towards those around him and his environment. Continuing the neurofeedback course, he became more sociable, initiating interactions and showing increased affection towards parent and siblings. Through being tuned in and making progressively more eye contact, he was more available to understand and appropriately respond to instructions, thereby improving his receptive language. His speech was in context more often, and he began to build upon his learning and use of vocabulary for better verbal expression. Throughout the course of treatment, he became significantly less easily distracted and had better motivation, sustained attention and concentration during activities. This resulted in him successfully being able to complete tasks and to begin to learn to write. And this is a 3-year-old, so that's quite early for that too. Our child has made rapid progress during and following the course of neurofeedback with Lou. Lou's very knowledgeable and creates the most effective individualized neurofeedback treatment for my young child. I wholeheartedly recommend neurofeedback at Star Jumps. And then perhaps the last one is an 11-year-old who has been diagnosed with dyslexia and dyspraxia, or developmental coordination disorder, as dyspraxia can sometimes be called. My child's concentration has improved. She's more willing to complete homework tasks with minimal fuss. She still has some angry outbursts, but we're able to calm her down a lot more quickly, and she apologizes without being prompted. Her reading has improved. She's enjoyed her experience of coming to Star Jumps. Really super. I don't know if you want me to read any more, Lou, but I think that gives a really good flavour of some of the differences your feedback has made.
No, I think that's a nice little cross section of children. So really all ages, but you know, I very rarely have a child where it doesn't make a difference. I mean, obviously there have been one or two over my 9 years that we haven't carried on with the treatment for one reason or another, but often it can be to do with the fact, I think, that children, if they're on a very high level of drugs, sometimes that can be slightly contraindicative to what I'm trying to do. So I have to be, you know, I sometimes will try, but if we don't get anywhere, then we just don't carry on with the treatment. And, you know, I always say to parents, you can come and, you know, we will always do 6 and then see what's going on. And if, you know, usually within that amount of time, we're starting to see some nice differences. And then nearly everybody wants to carry on with the treatment, which is great.
Thank you, Lou. That's been really helpful. It's lovely to see the equipment and be able to show people a little bit of how it works. If you'd like some more information, please email us at info@starjumps and we can give you more information and tell you more about neurofeedback or any of our other services. I'd like to thank you, Lou, for joining this broadcast tonight and to sharing your knowledge of neurofeedback and some of the experiences you've had offering it to children and young people. And I'd like to thank you for watching. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.